Hey guys, Steve Milton 8174 asked me to do a little bit of a follow-up to a video that Tony did. For those who are not familiar, Tony over at RadPad, who we don't know each other in person. He does follow my channel. I do watch his, we have spoken, but not in person, right? So we're aware of each other, as most YouTubers here in Nicaragua. It's a tiny market in English, right? So we pretty much all are at least aware of each other if haven't interacted directly. So he said, unrelated, because it was a New Year's Eve video, but he said, but I thought this video was interesting by a guy, Tony, building tiny homes in Nicaragua, talking about hiring workers. What was especially interesting was the mindset of the workers. Would love to hear your perspective. And then he links the video. Okay, so Steve, cool. So as an employer, as someone who's been employing here for a long time, I think my experiences are very different, right? So first of all, I've been employing here for most of a decade, 9 years. And I've been living in and out of Nicaragua for a long time. So even when I wasn't living here, I've almost continuously been an employer. What's funny is when I first lived here, I didn't employ anyone. I mean, that's probably goes without saying. It's the assumption, right? But I started employing people very quickly after I was here, not for the purpose of starting businesses in Nicaragua per se, but because we use Nicaragua staff for specific goals. As some of you know, I work internationally, so I work in many countries, right? We have some skill sets we get out of Mexico, some we get out of Panama, some we get out of Argentina, some we get out of Bolivia. We're all over the place, and here I am based in Nicaragua. So in this video by Tony, which I just watched, and I'm going to try to touch on as much of this as possible and hit the key points, because he did cover quite a bit. So one of the things he talks about a lot is the idea of contractors versus employees. And he looks at it from a cost loading perspective, and that's basically true. But I think that's a bad way to look at it. And I think books, so first of all, I am an absolute hater of self-help books. If someone puts out like the E-Myth, I haven't read that book, absolutely would avoid it like the plague. People who are, you never meet successful business people who are reading that stuff, right? It doesn't mean that there's nothing valuable in it, but they're a market of people who are not business people, who write books and make their money writing books and not being business people, right? And then their market is on people who aren't business people, but who want to be. And it's like this dream of business. And so they tend to be very bad advice by people who may have some neat ideas, but probably have not really used it that much, or don't understand the ramifications of what they're saying, or don't have the full picture. I don't know about the E-Myth specifically, but the things he says from the book definitely are like, whoa, huge red flags. This is anti-business. It's definitely from someone who doesn't have that history. So when you're looking at so same as in the U.S., right? If you have a 1099 contractor, if you're legally allowed to do that, that's really important. Same thing here. In a lot of cases, you don't have a choice about the employment methodology. You have to just follow the law. And if you're going to have someone who works for you full time, they have to be an employee. And if you're going to have a person who just does a few hours here and there or a little project, I guess you could make them an employee, but you're not going to. That's what contractors are for. And the concepts, just like in the United States, of a 1099 contractor or a W-2 employee, are pretty straightforward. If it walks like an employee, talks like an employee, it better be an employee. Same thing's going to be true here. I don't know the exact law on it, but trust me, the duck law that exists in the United States, if you have someone who seems like they should be an employee, trust me, if you don't have them as an employee and you're not paying them as such here, they're going to go to the labor board, and it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what contracts you have. You broke the law, and you're going to be in big trouble as an employer. You don't want to play that game. So basically, when you're working with contractors, it should feel like they should be a contractor. You want to use contractors in places where you're not getting an employee. They're not a part of your team, but you need to get a wall built. You need to get a sign made. You need to do a thing where you need to temporarily hire someone for a project or a set number of hours, something like that. Or you need someone 2 to 10 hours a week. It's not really an employee thing, but they need to show up on a regular basis. Probably okay with the contract. Make sure you have a good lawyer. The one that Tony has is scamming him, so he needs it. Tony, if you're watching this, the thing that you said that your lawyer said was okay, they oversaw some things where maybe they were hoping you'd get away with stuff, but they should have advised you what you were doing was illegal and that they could go to the courts or go to the labor board and get you in big trouble, because it's not only that the law was broken. This is where he had someone who he owed their severance to, and he negotiated on their severance. He didn't come up with I'm going to pay you double because you're going to wait. Like, there was no payment, and I don't even know if that would be legal ever, but there was no, we're going to give you something in exchange for us having screwed up. It was a basically intimidation tactic. Well, I don't have the money to pay you, so you're going to wait until this, and then hopefully I pay you in the future. And he intended to pay him, and I think he did pay him, and that's all cool. And he's not going to get in like huge trouble because it was just this delay tactic. But that contract is enough to go to a court and say, look, he knew he owed me the money. He knew I had no recourse. So I was trapped. I was under duress to sign this agreement because I was afraid that they were already saying they didn't have my money, because that's the thing. At that moment that the person quits, that liquidation, what he's referring to as severance, is their money that you're supposed to have been holding all along. Why didn't RadPad have the money? Probably just a mistake, but you are required by law to have that money all along. It's never a time it's a big surprise. We're going to get that at the end or later on, but there's no big surprises with that. There's no big, like, you have to come up with the money. Nope, you've got it set aside in a bank account all along, or your accountant or your lawyer are taking advantage of you, trying to make it look like you're doing better than you are, or something like that. So when those people quit, that money should be sitting there ready to go. And you can do it any way you want, but you have a responsibility to make sure that that cash is always there, because any one of your employees could quit at any time. Could be because you have to fire them. It could be because they don't like you anymore, they want to quit. It could be, quite often, they got a job somewhere else, or a family member got sick across the country and they have to go, and they don't have a choice. They have to go do whatever it is they need to do for their life. They need that cash that day, and it's their money. This is not your money that they're getting like a bonus of or anything like that. Just like the 13th month payment. It's not a Christmas bonus. It's simply their last paycheck of the year, right? Because you get 13 paychecks because it's a 13-month lunar month system, not a solar month system. So those things are not surprises. They're not weird. If it suddenly comes up that it's like a Christmas bonus, that suggests you've been paying on the wrong schedule all year long, and by that point it has caught up with you, and now you have to pay double because you've been paying a little bit in arrears all that time, maybe just a day or two, and no one notices because of that. And they refer to it as the quince, right? Every 15 days. But it's not actually every 15 days. It's every 14 days. That's how it legally works here. And you can't get around that, right? It's not like, well, we negotiated to do it. It doesn't work that way. It's a very strict law on payments. And so that's a thing where it's different than the United States. The United States or Canada, you have a lot more flexibility in how you pay. There's still a lot of checks and balances. There's still a lot of rules to follow. I would argue it's more complex, but that complexity brings you a lot of nice value too. So in a lot of these regards, I prefer the American system, because as a worker, I don't like the system. Like, I think it's dumb. But there's reasons it exists, and people have to bank on it, right? They anticipate that this is how it's going to work, and it's all got to do what they're expecting. So that's why it's standard, right? There isn't the opportunity for a lot of people to have access to lawyers, right? When you're in a low-cost system, low-pay system like this, the workers don't have lawyers, and they don't, like, things that we would just have, like, oh, I'm taking a new contract. My lawyer's always going to check it before I take a new contract, right? But they can't do that. They can't afford it. And so they need to be protected by a system that's always predictable and that they can't get tricked by an employer. So that's really why a lot of these things are the way that they are. So it's just something you have to know about the market, that you have to follow the rules, and the rules aren't really flexible. Most things in Nicaragua were very flexible, but paying employees is super cheap, very straightforward, but inflexible. So when you're dealing with workers, if they act like a full-time worker, they're a person, they're part of your team, they're expected to be there all the time, they're working more than just a small number of hours every week, they're an employee, and you need to treat them as such. And they need to be treated as such. They don't make enough money not to be, right? And when you pay them the real amount, and we'll get to the amounts in a bit, then there's taxes being involved. They get their health care, they get into the system. You get into the system as an employer, which is important, because if you want to qualify as an employer in the country, you have to have people on what's called INS. It's the payroll system. So all those things are important. Now, you don't necessarily want to be a resident. That you may want to invest and not be a resident. That's fine. In which case you aren't required to have people on INS, but they're going to be like, so who's running this business? Because you have no employees. It can get complex. You definitely want, by and large, you want your people to be employees. And once in a while, some fringe people you're going to want to have as contractors, exactly the same as in the United States. If you're a company of, say, 20 employees, you may have 1 or 2 contractors that you work with regularly that do other things. They work for other people. They're only available to you when they're available. You cannot set their schedule. I don't know how that affects here in Nicaragua, but in the United States, the moment you tell them how to do their job, the moment you tell them exactly when they have to be at work, they cannot be a contractor. They're an employee, just like that. Doesn't matter what contract you said, you can never contract around the law, because it's the law, right? It's not an employment contract that you're modifying. It is, these things make them an employee, whether you like it or not, whether they like it or not, which is mostly good. But there's times that I've been an employee and didn't want to be. I wanted to be a contractor, and the law said, no, I'm being treated as an employee. I have to follow these rules set by the employer. I have to follow their guidelines. They have to train me. Sorry, once those things happen, that's an employee. Here you have a little bit more leniency with that, but be careful because you're definitely doing stuff that in other markets wouldn't be legal, which probably means you're running a really fine line. Here, it feels good to get contractors. Generally, it's going to bite you. You especially have the problem that you have absolutely no hold over them. They can just not show up to work. What are you going to do about it, right? And it's not like you can't pay them. You owe them money, right? So they can often do a bit more damage. They have no loyalty. People will poach them, and you can't complain to anybody. You can do a lot of that with employees too, but employees have more loyalty for a lot of reasons, right? They have these things that are stored up. They can't completely leave you in a lurch. They can't extort you as long as you're doing the right things, right? But definitely, someone had the takeaway, right? Well, Tony did, and Martin Bowen did in his conversation. Always better to have contractors, not employees, less management. That is the furthest thing from the truth. It is better to have employees, not contractors, less management, right? Contractors require more management because you have to hire them and deal with their contracts and do stuff all the time. Employees, everything's governed by the law. You just follow the rules. You don't have to worry about like special contracts. You don't have to worry about setting something up. You don't have to worry about people turning over as fast. It's way more straightforward, and you can direct everything all the time, right? It's much more straightforward having employees the majority of the time. This is true in every market, right? It's not unique to Nicaragua, but Nicaragua plays out the same. And as someone who has many employees here, almost all are employees, right? Because that's what makes sense, because it lets us work them full time, because we don't have to carefully manage every hour that they're clocking to make sure they don't turn into employees. We don't have to manage how we're directing them or what we're doing to make sure they don't accidentally become employees, because the worst thing is contractors who can sue you as employees because you were trying to get away with them not paying what you required. Suddenly you owe back taxes, suddenly you're involved in tax fraud, suddenly you're involved in employment fraud. You don't want that stuff, right? Just hire employees, pay their taxes, and be done. Okay, so that's if you want low overhead, if you want few problems. Employees are how that is done. If you're trying to find ways to skirt the edge of systems and take a lot of risks and put in a lot more management overhead, trying to find ways to save a few dollars, you probably need to rethink having a business in Nicaragua, because you're not going to save enough money to make that make sense. As an expat investing in the country, you have to think about that employment numbers are so tiny that these types of savings make no sense. The overhead of dealing with a contract should cost you more than an employee would. Just have another employee, right? Like you have to think about those things differently. So let's get to some of that. A lot of what Tony talked about was the mindset of employees and paying them and how that works. So, and I said this to Tony in the comments, but I'll say it here because I think it's an important point. One of the things that Tony's implying that he's doing with these employees is he's coming to them and saying, look, I'm going to pay you this really low amount. He said $300 a month. And this is just a starter. Like, we're a new business. We're going to get going. We're going to make tons of money in the future. We're going to pay you a lot more money in the future. He's building on this dream system. And there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of American companies do that, especially in America. It's very popular with startups to be like, okay, it's going to take a long time before we're making money. So look, we can't pay you a ton of money now, but in the future, you're earning this future. Well, so you got to be aware of a couple things here. One, that doesn't work here. Everybody, especially if you get down towards San Juan del Sur, if you're in like Rivas in the south of the country, the amount of someday there's going to be a big successful business. Every company does that, right? Every company has these wild dreams and nothing ever comes to fruition. The market knows that. They also know that they can put in all the sweat equity. They can work so hard. And when it comes to the point where suddenly there's profits, everyone's fired. We're moving to even cheaper people because we don't need the people to put in that much sweat equity anymore. We're going to save money by having just cheaper labor. And sorry, everybody. And you're kind of selling this dream of stock ownership is what they're feeling, right? Oh yeah, if I work really hard for the next 5 years, after that, I'm going to be with this company. They're going to pay me twice as much, 3 times as much. I'm going to be doing really well because I've put in this time. But they know, because they're from Nicaragua. They know how precarious these jobs are. And the same thing would be in the U.S. If you said this to me in the U.S., I'd be like, where's my guarantee? You're going to fire me the moment that we get it off the ground, as companies have done, right? Pretty much anyone who's worked with startups who said those things always lead to, at some moment when the money starts coming in and people start being like, well, where's my cut of it? instantly it's either, why would you get a cut? I'm the one who put up all the risk for all these years, because they forget, or they don't have that feeling of that the other people are owners the way that they were given that impression. Or they're simply like, oh, I don't want people around who are expecting more money. I can make twice as much money. I can make an extra $1 million today by simply firing these people who are asking for too much money and hiring younger people who haven't been around. Done. Right? It's hard to resist those kinds of numbers, and people get burned by that all the time. So here in Nicaragua, they're used to that. They know that their jobs can be cut at the blink of an eye, and that no amount of commitment means that that's going to come through at the end. They also know that the chances that a business, any business, is going to do well enough that you're going to be able to pay that extra money basically is impossible. They might know, hopefully they know, that if you were successful and then started paying them that money, that would make the company risky, because anyone else can look at the business model and say, oh, well, they're doing that, but they're doing it at 3 times the labor cost. So we're going to come in at real labor cost, and our products will be cheaper, and we don't have to develop the market, so our overhead to get started is cheaper. And so it doesn't matter what that product is, right? In this case, he has a specific business, but this could be anything, right? You're going to manufacture chairs. Right, you're going to make wooden chairs, and you're going to develop this market. You're going to convince people that this type of wooden chair is really great, and you put in all this marketing, and people are like, I do like that chair. And then you're like, okay, we're doing such a great job, we're going to pay all of our people 3 times as much. Well, a competitor is going to go, I can copy that chair, and I can do it with labor that cost 1/3 as much, and then I can sell them for 90% of the cost, and I don't have the overhead of the startup, and I don't have the overhead of the old employees, and they can make a higher profit margin on a cheaper product. This is how, for example, people who watch my channel, a lot of Chinese lens makers are making amazing lenses at incredibly low prices right now. And they're very high quality. Bright & Star, 7 Artisans, TT Artisan, companies like that. And they make these just unbelievable lenses. How are they doing that? Well, they don't have high marketing and high research levels. They're taking old established designs that are affordable to implement and affordable to engineer, and simply doing a good job with them. They're not developing the knowledge of the market. They're not developing the market itself. All that's done. They just have to get out there for very low cost to be like, look, we made a product that's basically the same as this really good one, but it's $200 instead of $1,000. And a whole bunch of us go, 1/5 the cost. Yeah, I'm not going to turn that down, right? And in some cases, you get a better product because they had more money to put into the actual engineering. Often it's not quite as good, but it's often basically the same, right? And it's like, well, why would you pay 5 times as much? And so that same kind of thing would happen, probably not that dramatically. The same basic thing is going to happen. And so you have this, it guarantees that either you can't pay the people or a competitor can crush you. And there's really no way around it, right? That's a cost that you can't bear as a company going forward. So that mentality is a very dangerous one as a company, but you're basically safe because your employees are going to turn over. So they're not going to be there, and the people you made those promises to will be gone. So that's okay, but they know that they'll be gone. So they know that those promises don't mean anything to them, and that there's no reason for them to use them as motivation. So what we do have, right, is I think a lot of people when they come to Nicaragua, and certainly me included, right? So this is not unique to Tony. This is not an indictment of Tony in any way. What's happening is a couple things. One, I don't think he's done the deep research on what the labor costs are. So he's saying that it's really low at 300 and they need to work up to something. 300 is actually a skilled labor number. That's not an unskilled labor number. So he's already paying a pretty good premium on top of what people can absolutely survive on here. Now, I'm not saying that you want people that are surviving on that. I'm not saying you don't want to pay more, but I think he's looking at those numbers off by quite a bit. So for construction, the minimum wage is right around 200, not 300. So that's a 50% markup going in. And at that 50% markup, there's this, and we'll pay you more in the future, I promise. So they know that there's a business flaw. They know that there's a false promise of the future, or maybe not a false promise. I'm sure Tony's very genuine in meaning to do that, but it's this isn't going to play out promise. This just doesn't have value to them as employees. They see all that. They also see that he's doing that over an amount that's actually a really good pay. Now, that doesn't mean it's too much, right? If he's getting really good people, he wants to make sure people are really knocking down his door to come work for him. That $300 mark may be just fine. And certainly there are people who are worth paying more, and they'll work longer hours, or they'll bring some skill or whatever, and that 300 could be completely reasonable. And there's reasons why you'd pay even more. It's not a problem. And it's important to understand that in one breath he's saying this 300 is really low and I need to get it way up. But in another, he described the people that he was bringing on as essentially unskilled and needing to be trained on everything. It seems like he's looking at unskilled labor, which makes sense for a lot of this manual stuff, but then paying at a partially skilled number with these like promise of something greater. So that doesn't feel like it fits really well. I think that the starting number is too high, and that reaction to that number being as low as it is makes them feel like there's an opportunity to skew this. Now, the thing that he said about don't pay monthly, pay like bi-weekly or even weekly, absolutely. Like that goes for anyone living paycheck to paycheck in any market. Those are things you know from being in U.S. business, right? You can't pay monthly to people who are making anywhere close to minimum wage, and it's for their own good, right? Because it minimizes the opportunity for them to lose all of their money all at once. If they're going to save, they're going to save. If they're going to, and just make sure that you pay earlier. Don't if you're going to do that, don't be like, well, I was going to pay you a full month after the first month. Now I'm going to go a full month and then pay you weekly. No. You start the first week, right? You get the money earlier. You always pay early, right? When people are very low earning, that's really important. They need the money right away, but don't give them big lump sums. Generally, some people are super responsible and you can give them lump sums and they would benefit from getting those lump sums early. But be aware that makes it much harder for them, and this is true anywhere, right? Talk to Americans who make minimum wage and get paid every 2 weeks instead of every 1 week. They tend to have spending problems because they get this emotional reaction to being so poor at the end of 2 weeks, and then the amount that they get the next day is twice as much as if they got paid weekly. So the emotional response is, I have so much money, I have so little money, is so much more than what you get weekly, or even better, daily. But no one pays that way. There's a lot of cost to that, right? There's reasons why you don't want to pay that way, generally, just because of the overhead of the system. So all that said, so we're starting off with, I think, a kind of false sense that these workers are getting way too little money. They should have enough money at that pay without a problem to be able to get an apartment, pay rent, do whatever they need to do, right? So I know people who make $300 a month, and of course they do a little extra hustle, try to make an extra, $20, $30 a month on the side, so they're maybe making closer to $350 total. A lot of people work, a little weekend job or something, and they're able to get a private apartment all by themselves. They're able to live in major expensive cities. Not that any city in Nicaragua is super expensive, but they're not moving to super low cost markets, right? They're able to commute to work. It's important to give a perspective. What you're talking about as the amount that Tony's talking about that he needs to pay his starting people is almost exactly, it's just a tiny bit less, it is almost exactly double the pay for an experienced public school teacher, which is they get paid about $160 to $170, but they're expected to pay for a bunch of their school supplies. So their actual end of month take home is really close to $150. So $300 is essentially double what a public school teacher makes in many of the markets. So think about a teacher in the United States and then taking a job and saying, well, this is like an entry-level job, but it's manual, so yeah, it's a bit of work. And then being like, but it's twice what a teacher with a degree would get, right? And you're like, oh, that would actually be a good amount of money, right? Teachers don't get paid great, but double what a teacher makes is a pretty good starting rate for manual, unskilled labor or barely skilled labor, right? So I think a lot of the things that he's saying, well, suddenly they need money for housing. Well, they're saying they need money for housing, and of course they want more money, but you don't have to provide housing at that rate, right? That's not required. You're already paying them enough to get an apartment, to feed their family or whatever. And it's assumed that people who are at that rate are either single or they're dual income, right? It could be that one person's working for you and then another is running a pulperia at home or some other kind of home business or takes a job or whatever, but there's a lot of options. I'm not saying that we don't want to work and get everyone a higher pay scale than Nicaragua currently does. Absolutely, for sure. But be aware that picking 1 or 2 employees that happen to work for you and paying them way above market doesn't fix the market, but it does often cause problems. You want to pay based on market, be the best payer in your market, but by a little bit, but then hire more people, right? Not fewer people at way above market, right? It causes disruption and it doesn't make sense. You want your business decisions to be sensible. From a how it plays out in the market standpoint. The people don't want to be like, oh, he makes 50% more than me for doing less work just because he happened to get employed by this company, but there aren't enough jobs for me at that company. Then you get resent. Like, you don't want that, right? You want people to want to work for you, but you don't want people upset that other people are working for you. Then they're coming to him and being like, well, I bought a car or bought a motorbike or whatever, and took out $150 a month loan. That's a huge amount of loan considering you can get a bike here for several $100s. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And why didn't they have a bike before? Because they didn't need one, right? Have I seen this happen? No, I don't. None of that have I seen people happening. I think what's happening is he's paying them so much that they're going, well, I can go do big things. I have excess money, like a lot all of a sudden. They probably weren't making that much before. So all of a sudden they're like, oh, I could get a bike. And they don't know anything about what bikes cost because they've never had that kind of money before, probably, right? And they know that they've got this like this story going on where they're like, oh, but I can't afford housing. Oh, but I can't afford this. I can't afford that. And so they know they can come back and give this sob story about a bad decision that they make and then make it feel like it's the employer's problem. It is not, right? It is not an employer's problem that an employee made too much money and spent it, right? It makes no sense. So when they say, I got to have gas, why do you have to have gas? You didn't need it before. Well, for my bike. Well, why do you have a bike? You didn't need it before, right? Well, I took out a loan. Well, I don't care. Right? Like, I'm sorry that you took out a bad loan, but I didn't make you take out a loan. I didn't suggest you take out a loan. I didn't pay you to take out a loan. I paid you so that you could live, so I wouldn't have to deal with these things. Right. But I've never seen someone do that. Right. So this is not something I'm seeing as a recurring problem. I'm guessing that this behavior of responding to paying really well as not enough, as coming across as, oh, I can tell these stories and they will go over well. And then there's a very stock thing that is this like most standard employee or expat scam, not that expats do, that happens to expats, and that is when Nicaraguans, especially employees, come to you and say that their family is sick or someone has died or someone. That is so common, so standard as a scam. So it just constantly happens and everybody experiences it. It's impossible to overstate. If you run a business here, you will encounter this almost immediately, and it will be never ending. Yeah. I had to take a quick break there because we had a tarantula almost come into the house. It was on the front porch, and I had to shoo him away. Video of that, I hope it turns out and you can actually see something. It's very hard to use a broom and convince a spider to leave when you're trying to film it with the other hand and stuff. And of course, my kids can't film it because they're freaking out because there's a tarantula, but he's okay. He's out in the yard now. So there's a standard scam, right? Of, oh, someone's sick in my family, I need money. And as Tony mentioned, the healthcare is free. It's not amazing healthcare for free, but there is free healthcare. And if you didn't come along as an employer, no one in Nicaragua is going to pay for their health things all the time. They're not going to, oh, my mom's sick, I need money. Well, your employer is not going to give you money. That's not a thing, right? They're only telling you that because you're an expat, and they're trying, if you have a friend who you've been here for years and you really know them and suddenly they have a medical issue and you can help them, great. But when it's your employees and they're new and of course they're going to come because they know these stories work. They already know the housing story worked. Oh, I can't afford housing. Yes, they can. And, oh, I got this bike and I need it. No, they don't. And, oh, someone's sick. I need money. Yeah. They've learned that telling these stories is getting good results. And so they tell other people that this works, and more people are telling these stories. And so I think what's happening is this very expected, and almost every business goes through this when they're new in Nicaragua, is learning that there's all these stories that are told and everyone's going to come with a reason. Oh, can I do this? Can I do that? And after time, once you put a stop to all those things, I would have employees come and say, oh, I need to borrow money for my kid's birthday or for just some happy event, right? That's my mom's, it's Mother's Day. I need some money for that. And it's completely reasonable. And they'll stop asking for money. They'll start asking for loans. And then it'll be, oh, but I don't make enough to pay back the loan, which is why I needed the loan in the first place. Or they'll forget about the loan, or they'll hope you'll forget about the loan. And sometimes it works. works, right? So it's a very, it's good for them to do that, because if you forget it 1 out of 10 times, well, at least they got a little bit more money than they would have anyway otherwise. So this whole thing of constantly asking for money, it's a cultural thing. And if you play into it, it is going to exacerbate the problem. They know to test it. They're testing you. And if it works, they're going to test you more. Now, that's not to say you should never give loans. It doesn't mean that you should never give housing. I'm not saying any of that, but don't expect that it's something that's needed. And you're not going to go out and get unskilled labor and be like, hey, oh, you need all these things? No, they were able to live before. Without them, they can live now that they have a good job. They can live even better than before, right? And if this job isn't good enough, they should go get a different one, right? But they're not, because it is a good job. For ourselves, we do sometimes employ people, and we do relocate them sometimes. And when we do that, it typically comes with housing, right? But we understand we're getting skilled labor. We're only doing it because it's highly skilled labor. It's someone who has a specific degree, specific training in something that we want, and we're paying quite a bit more. And they don't have the familiar support. They don't have, we need them to live close to work or whatever, and that's not where they live. So that would be an unreasonable expectation. They can't just move to a new place and buy a house. So we provide housing in those cases most of the time. And that's absolutely fine. Like, there are cases where that makes sense. We've also experimented with giving loans, and in some cases it works pretty well. It can be frustrating. People will always push the boundaries, but we did a thing like, here's the amount you're allowed to take out. It applies to everyone. It's equal. That's an important thing. Make sure that everything is equal. Otherwise, it becomes well, he asked for it and he got it, so it's owed to me. Right? You don't want to get into that boat. But when you do the, I have a housing thing, I have a loan thing or whatever, you're creating a unfair based on someone either making bad decisions or lying. It's kind of like when they repaid student loans in the United States, right? Did they pay back other people who had paid their student loans and reward them for doing what they were supposed to do? No. They punished them by taking their competitors, the people who were in the job market but didn't pay back their student loans, and then suddenly forgave them. And so the people who behaved the worst were rewarded the most. If you do that as an employer, you are going to teach your employees in a heartbeat. This does not require thought. They will instantly know, oh, I have to lie or fudge or whine to get paid what's fair, because the people who are doing that are getting paid more than me. So they're going to feel that they have to do that. So if you're going to do loans, for example, say, okay, every one of your employees can carry a $100 loan, and it can never go over, say, 90 days. Or they can have up to a $100 loan, and it's rolling. And once they take out 100, they don't ever have to pay it back, but they can never borrow a penny more. And yes, it's like you gave everyone $100 until they go to get their severance or liquidation, then they have to pay it back. And you can have that in a contract that you've given them a loan against liquidation, and they have to pay the loan out of the initial liquidation. And as long as their liquidation is greater than $100, you're covered. And if it's not, well, whatever, it's not very much money. But by doing that, right, you say, oh, you already have a loan for 100. You haven't paid that back. You can't take out another loan. And that gives a really strong, you're not getting any more, but people who borrow it and pay it back can borrow again. And you have a system where they know that they can always go get that $100 if they need it. And if they never pay it back, they've lost that mechanism, and you just make it real. I can't. That would be cheating everyone else, right? You agreed. You didn't pay back. That's fine. You're already borrowing the $100. What do you expect, right? And it really does put the onus on them where it should be, right? You're already giving them a benefit. You don't need to keep giving them more and more benefits based on the benefit you gave them at the beginning. And I think a lot of these things that feel scary or feel like they're hard or feel like they're a lot of money come down to this is a gut feeling that you have to behave a certain way or should behave a certain way, and it's allowing things to become emotionally skewed, and it makes it seem like employment is harder or more complex than it really is, and a lot of it is just, we feel like we need to pay more, so we feel badly that they're not making that much as employees. And that's the case with any employees. You can go to America and as an employer, it's always like, oh, I wish I could pay my employees more. I wish I could make more, right? Like that would be great. but there's, market rates for a reason, because it makes the market sensible and it makes things function. Okay, so talking about the actual rates. So when talking about the contractor versus employees, with the contractors, yes, you pay more and they're done. You don't have to have any burden, but you have this management overhead of making sure they're really contractors and making sure that all that fits as it's supposed to. It's a lot of actual overhead, and I highly recommend against it. It sounds good up front. It's easy to make it just, you don't have to worry about anything. That's the farthest thing from the case. And if it feels like it's easy, that's when you're going to get burned, right? So, but when you have employees, a few things that Americans just tend to miss, right? And hopefully your lawyers and those people should be advising you, but you need a lawyer who knows Nicaraguan business, knows American business, can translate those things for you. Or you need business advisors who are like, okay, here's what it's like doing business in Nicaragua and so forth. And a lot of people don't have that, right? They just jump in and that's fine. But there's a lot of things you need to know for Nicaragua, for any business. Imagine doing the same thing in the United States. Wait, I have to pay taxes and my employees also have to pay taxes on the same thing? Yes. Oh, how do I do that, right? You got to know, right? Well, I can just do 1099 and contract. Oh my gosh, you're going to jail, right? Like that is tax fraud. So you got to know some things. And one of those is that we pay lunar months here, right? Everyone, all the time. That means that 13th paycheck, the thing that people call the Christmas bonus. So it's not what's known as a Christmas bonus. It's actually their 13th paycheck because they're supposed to get 13 months of paycheck. So if you pay biweekly, it'll be their 25th and 26th paycheck, however you want to look at that. But it's simply that you're supposed to be paying over a course of 13 paychecks throughout the year, whatever you did as a monthly rate, because monthly here means lunar, or every 4 weeks, 28 days. So that's how it works out. In the United States, we're used to monthly meaning the calendar month or solar month. And so that's just a little linguistic difference. And once you know that those semantics are different, then it's really straightforward. It is not a bonus. It is not extra. It's not something you can not pay. And it's not something that you can get away without dealing with a proration, because the proration is supposed to be happening automatically by paying on time. So if you choose, which you are kind of able to get away with, paying on the 15th and the 1st, then you must make a true up payment at the end of the 12th. And so to you as an employer, it's going to feel like a bonus. It's going to act like a bonus, but it is not a bonus. It is the paycheck that they have been waiting for, and they've actually been loaning you a little bit of money every month throughout the year, until at the end they've loaned you an entire paycheck, essentially. Sorry for the dogs who came into my office while I was recording this, and are now maniacs. The other thing is the liquidation, or what Tony called the severance. It is a severance, right? So that's correct, but it's the name for it in Nicaragua is liquidation. And what this is there's a certain percentage, and I don't know the numbers, that every day that someone works in Nicaragua, you are supposed to be giving them a kind of a pension. And it's just money that is set aside. It is their money. They earn it on the day that it happens. You owe it to them on the day it happens. So if they work for you one day as an employee, and let's say they make $10, and it's maybe $1 of this additional liquidation, that money should be going into a bank account every single time that they work, or at least every time you make give them a paycheck, and that money needs to be set aside. The smart thing is to make a separate bank account. The smart thing is to make an extra bank account, and the money that goes into there is just the liquidation. You can never accidentally touch it. It is never accessible to you for business things because it's not your money. Legally, you're allowed to use that money, to the best of my knowledge, but you take on a risk that you're borrowing money from your employees that you owe to them should they quit or you fire them or they get sick or whatever. And so it's really important that you have access to that money at all times. If you have to pull it by selling something, like there's a certain amount of accommodation that's allowed for that, but you have to have that money. It is their money. It is not something that they get at the end of employment based on you separating them. It is essentially a protection mechanism whereby some of the money that they earn is set aside to protect them against the time of unemployment. It's basically their unemployment tax. And if you keep them employed throughout their lifetime, then when they retire, they get a massive lump sum that says, you never used unemployment. Here's what would have been used for your unemployment. Now you have this bonus at the end. And that's amazing, right? but they've earned it all along. I'm sure it's fine if you were to take that and say invest it in something, as long as you had access to enough cash so that when people retire, they can be like, oh my gosh, I own stocks or something, but as long as they can cash out and have more money. If it's less, you're going to have to true up. So be aware you owe them that money no matter what you do with it. You can't like invest it and then say, oh, sorry, I lost it. That is not okay. It's still their money. You still have to pay them the money, even if you borrowed it. That is how that works. So there's this feeling that a lot of American companies, a lot of foreign investors have when they come to Nicaragua, that they're being hit with this surprise amount of money that, oh, suddenly I owe them this money that where is it supposed to come from? Well, they were earning it all along. Why wasn't it set aside? It should never be a shock. It should never be a surprise. And you should never be in a position where there isn't enough liquid capital set aside that you would never touch and you never calculate it as part of your profits, right? You don't owe taxes or anything on that because it's not your money. It's the liquidation for the employees. It's always sitting there ready for them because it's their money. That can't be overstated how much you're just borrowing their money. You're just holding it for them. Again, it's like a Christmas account at the bank, right? Where you put in your money and it just sits there. The bank's not allowed to go spend that. They also doesn't make interest. At the end of the year, when you've put aside $10 a week, they then at the end of the year go, here's your $520 that you saved up throughout the year, and we didn't let you touch it until it's Christmas time so you can go shopping. Same as this, but this is for unemployment. As soon as they're unemployed, they get whatever they've saved up. And so it really, none of these things should be seen as surprises. We shouldn't use words like bonuses or severance because they make it feel like we're providing something. And maybe that thing is optional, or maybe we can negotiate it. It is not. It is their money, and we're simply holding it and then giving it to them when the time is done. Now, I believe you are allowed to hold it should there be something like, oh, they stole something from work or they haven't returned something. They have to come and wrap up things at work before they get handed the liquidation. That probably is okay. Check with a lawyer. I am not a lawyer, and those things would change from time to time, but I'm sure there are some things where it's used for some amount of protection, right? Oh, this person stole the company vehicle and took off. Well, you don't have to pay them liquidation. They stole the vehicle, right? It gives you time to take them to court or whatever, I'm sure. But in the example given, right, saying, but in the example that Tony gave, right, where they came and he's like, how am I supposed to have this money? Well, he is supposed to have that money, right? That's part of the responsibility of an employer, is to have that money ready and to give it to them right away. And if you try to negotiate that, you at some point you're like, look, I spent your money. What, but they're going to go and try to, take your house or your car or something because you essentially stole from them. And the idea that they owe you a certain amount of labor, they owe you for the day that they worked, right? This is how employment works. And this is where I think like the E-Myth stuff is a big problem, because I think it's given people the impression that like employees owe you things that they don't. The way that employment works, world over, everywhere. Employees work, employers owe them money. And it is as simple as that. And at the time that they work, the work is done, the money is owed. Employees do not owe something or do not need to wait to be paid until, say, a project is done or a sale is made. That is okay in commission circumstances. But if you're doing things on commission, people know that they're on commission, and in many cases, you must pay them a salary as well, or you need to work something out. There needs to be a situation where they know they're actually going to get paid for what they do, and it depends on your jurisdiction and all those things. But there is this feeling, often from new business people, that employees aren't owed until the business is successful, for example, or aren't owed as in total or whatever. And the idea that, well, we haven't sold anything, we haven't made a profit yet, where's the money going to come to pay you? Well, that's not the employee's problem. Employees don't own the company. They're not taking on that risk. They don't get the benefits of ownership. They don't get the risks of ownership. As a business owner, I do not get to push ownership risks onto my employees. That's not right, and it's not legal. They show up and do the job that I pay them to do. How viable my business model is, how well my sales go, how much money we make is irrelevant. They've done the work. They are owed the money. If you work at a restaurant and you're a waiter and let's say you're a cook, because it's a little bit easier because there's no tips, and you're supposed to make $10 for working for the day, and you go to a restaurant that's doing really well and their food is popular, or you go to another that their location is bad, so no one's stopping. It's not the cook's fault that the business is good or bad, and they may not control the ingredients of the location or the waiters. And that the one should be held accountable for someone else's mistakes, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense from an employment standpoint. It doesn't make any sense from a legal standpoint. It's really important when you're thinking about being an employer that you think about the fact that your employees provide their value for the time that they've worked. Whether or not they complete a project for you, whether or not you're able to go sell the thing that they've been working on, whether or not you're profitable or any of those things are absolutely 100% could not be more irrelevant to how much they get paid. They get paid for having done the work. And that same logic is also why you never give bonuses based on company performance. It makes no sense. You could give bonuses based on, I hired someone to make 5 widgets, but if you make 7 in the same amount of time, I'll give you a bonus. Okay, that's a productivity-based bonus as long as that person can control all the factors that allow them to make more or fewer widgets, then great. But if they don't control that 100%, then that's a scam. And as an employer, you should never want to use bonuses. The only time you ever desire a bonus system is for unethical reasons, so it's not advised to be that kind of employer. And if you're an employee and you're offered a bonus, you want to run away. It means that your employer is intending from the very beginning to scam you, right? They know you don't control the bonuses. They know that they are optional, and maybe they will pay them or pay them some of the time, but they are withholding the ability to guarantee payment until they decide that they want to. And so it's just a really bad system. I've been writing about that for 15 years. And so those are things, just avoid those things, right? And none of that's going on here, right? That's just explaining more employment ecosystem to this. But there were a lot of questions about this employment stuff that Tony had posted recently. And I think he's got a lot of good information. But I think there's a lot of it that this is very much this feels like early discovering how businesses work and these are things that companies often get, right? When you're a new employer, and the same thing happens in the US, and you've never experienced all the headaches that come with employees before, you find out about 1099 contractors and you say, oh, this is going to solve all my problems. Then the first time you get sued for tax fraud or employment fraud or both, you suddenly go, oh my gosh, contracting is terrible. I don't ever want to do contracting. I need to go back to employment. And there's just these layers that you know, as you become a more mature employer, you start to learn these things. And so there's one of the things, and I warn about this so much, people come to Nicaragua and they start businesses here rather than being business people who then make another business here. And that's one of the most dangerous things because in theory, you want to be learning these things in your home market where it's easier and you understand more things. You know what employment is like in your home country because you were an employee there, most likely. You know what pay scales make sense and what housing makes sense and how things work because you've had them happen to you firsthand. And when you come to Nicaragua, you're now in a market where you don't know what's valuable, you don't know what makes sense, you don't know a lot of things, and then your employees know that you don't know those things, and they're going to play you, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and your lawyer doesn't necessarily, 1, look out for you, or 2, even in some cases know what's going on, and 3, they don't know what you don't know. And they're often caught by surprise especially if you get down to Rivas, right? Is once you go to southern Nicaragua, the quality of everything drops off. Your accountants, your lawyers, all those things get way more sketchy. And of course, there's good ones down there too, but they're much fewer and farther between because up in most of the country, there's no real market in expats. And so people have to be good for Nicaraguans by and large, and any expats are just extra income. But when you're in Rivas, there's so many expats and so few Nicaraguans and so few Nicaraguan businesses that the real money is in going after the expats. And the big money isn't in doing a great job for expats because they often can't evaluate that. They don't know what good and bad look like. And so they tend to be very difficult to make happy when things are good, but pretty easy to mislead when things are bad. And so there's a lot of money in just not doing a great job down there. And so anyone who speaks English or wants to gravitate towards that kind of behavior, that's where they're going to head because it just makes sense for them. So overall, I think a lot of the employment stuff is good. You need to do your research and be aware of these things ahead of time. You need to know how these different things work. But you also, I cannot possibly say this enough times. If you are not an experienced, successful business person outside of Nicaragua, there's no chance you're going to be one in Nicaragua. That is absolutely designed to fail in every possible way. And I know that some of you desperately want investment, residency, and you're willing to do almost anything to get it. And looking at businesses, looking at how do I make a business in Nicaragua, until you've lived here long enough to have some idea of what people are earning, how employment works, like all these things you learn over time. And if you're just jumping in, the more you jump in, the more you're going to set up failure, and the more you're going to increase risk. And that's exactly what you don't want to do in a business. And especially if you're doing your business for residency, you don't care so much about being wildly successful. What you're really worried about is being wildly failure. And so you really want to have a conservative approach where you're doing things to make sure your losses are protected against. Whereas a traditional business where you're not dealing with residency, typically you take huge risks on your losses because that's how you manage to get large gains. But no one should be looking at Nicaragua as a large gains market. It does not make sense that way. All right, that's my analysis on that. I hope that helped clear some of that up. Hopefully it's useful for everyone who asked. I know that was really long, but there was a lot in there, and I think this employment stuff is really important. And it's easy to see things like this and think, there's just simple takeaways, right? Pay more, provide housing, and I think all those things are wrong. All those things are creating the problems that we're now seeing.